Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the passport he locked away. Right now, over 85% of the people watching aren't subscribed. If you've been enjoying these Nero Wolfe stories, hitting that subscribe button is the best way to be sure you never miss the next mystery. Your support helps keep these stories alive and lets us keep bringing them to you. Archie Goodwin here, and the first thing worth noting is that it was one of those evenings when Manhattan liked to pretend it was Paris. The lamps along 35th Street putting a faint amber sheen on the sidewalks, taxis sighing as they slowed at the corner, and a breath of cold air curling under the Brownstone's front door. I had just returned from an errand and was settling at my desk in the office, going through a stack of routine correspondence Wolfe would sooner burn than read. Fritz had already carried Wolfe's tray upstairs for his dinner at 8, so the house was in its usual hush, the silence of polished wood and good order. When the doorbell sounded, sharp and quick, I rose, knowing Fritz would never abandon his kitchen post for that duty. I opened the door to a young woman with pale gloves and a determined mouth that trembled at the corners. She stood clutching a small leather case, brown with brass trim, her fingers white where they gripped the handle. A taxi's exhaust still hung about her shoulders, and her eyes darted past me into the hallway with a furtive urgency. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked, voice pitched low, cultured but with a tremor. "That's right," I said. "And you're about to tell me you need Nero Wolfe more than he needs you." Her lips pressed tight at the flippancy, but she stepped inside when I moved back. I shut the door behind her and led her through the hall into the office. The lamps were lit, throwing a honey glow over the yellow chair, the red leather guest seats, and Wolfe himself, planted behind his desk with the implacable weight of an oak tree. He glanced up from a book, one thick finger marking his place. "Archie," he murmured, "you bring me another solicitor. I forbid it." The woman's hands trembled around her case, yet she lifted her chin. "Mr. Wolfe, I am Evelyn Harcourt. This is not business for a solicitor. It is life and death." Wolfe closed his book and set it aside with deliberation. "Pfui, that phrase has lost all vitality from overuse. Sit, madam." She lowered herself into the nearest red chair, the case still balanced on her knees. I took my station near Wolfe's desk, not missing the way her eyes lingered on the safe in the corner. "You have a difficulty," Wolfe said. "State it concisely." "I cannot," she whispered. "Not fully. Only this. I beg you to place this case in your safe and keep it there until I return for it. It must be protected. If it falls into other hands, consequences will follow far beyond my own ruin." Wolfe scowled. "I am not a depository. There are banks for that." "No bank is safe in this matter," she insisted, fingers tightening on the handle. "They watch me already. If I attempted a deposit, they would know. Please, Mr. Wolfe, you are the only man in New York whom they would not dare approach by force." I caught the quick look she gave me then, as if she hoped I might add my persuasion. I stayed silent, watching Wolfe. His lids lowered, considering, his mouth pursed in irritation. "Madam, I do not—" She cut him short, her voice rising. "If it is not secured, there may be disgrace for this country. There may be scandal in places where secrecy is essential. I cannot tell you more. I have sworn, yet if you refuse, the responsibility will be yours." The silence stretched. The tick of the wall clock sounded like a hammer. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, breathing deeply through his nose. Finally, he opened them and said, "Bah, you attempt to coerce me with vague intimations. I do not relish coercion. Still, I observe your agitation is genuine. You are not clever enough to feign it so." "Very well. First, an assurance. This involves no treason against my country." Her eyes widened. "Never. On my honor, it does not." Wolfe inclined his head once. "Archie, bring the safe key." I crossed the office, unlocked the heavy door, and swung it open. Evelyn rose, set the case inside with reverence, and stepped back. I closed the door and turned the key, the lock clanging with finality. "There," Wolfe said, his voice sour. "Your case is imprisoned. But understand me, madam, I will not defend it by stratagem or force. Should lawful authority demand it, I will yield." She nodded, relief washing over her features though her lips quivered. "That is all I ask. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. You will have reason to know you have served more than one life tonight." She stood, smoothing her gloves, though her hands still shook. I escorted her to the hall. Her step faltered at the door and she turned once more. "I shall return within days. Until then, keep it locked. Please." Then she was gone, the echo of her heels fading on the pavement, the cab door slamming, and the night reclaiming its hush. I shut the door and came back to the office. Wolfe had already reclaimed his book but had not opened it. He stared at the safe with a disgusted expression. "A custodian," he muttered. "I have become a nursemaid to strangers' toys." "Come now," I said, lowering into my chair. She looked about ready to collapse. "You'd have had her fainting across your yellow upholstery if you'd said no." He grunted, eyes closing again. "Impertinent. This is folly, Archie. Yet." He waved one hand vaguely. "Your instincts will monitor the situation. Do so. And keep your tongue until I decide whether this absurdity merits further attention." I looked at the safe, heavy and mute in the corner, holding its locked secret. Whatever Evelyn Harcourt had placed in our charge, it had her shaken to the bone, and now it sat behind steel on Wolfe's authority, waiting to show its teeth. Archie Goodwin again, and the morning after Miss Harcourt's performance found me in my proper place at the office desk, writing up a dull report for a client who had paid late and complained loudly. Fritz's footsteps padded away upstairs, tray in hand, as he carried Wolfe's breakfast to his room. The brownstone smelled faintly of coffee and buttered rolls, with a heavier aroma drifting up from the kitchen that promised a luncheon Wolfe would actually find edible. I was sharpening a pencil when the inevitable summons came, Wolfe's voice calling through the ceiling like a foghorn, an imperious demand for my presence. I went upstairs, knocked once, and entered. Wolfe sat propped in bed with the tray balanced before him, shirred eggs, toast, and the pot of coffee. He ate with deliberate precision, as though each bite required the full sanction of his authority. His eyes rose to me, heavy-lidded, and he dabbed at his mouth. "Archie," he said, "that woman's case in the safe has intruded upon my repose." "You're the one who let it through the door," I replied. "Don't blame your digestion on me." He sniffed. "I have permitted it against judgment. Already I regret. Return to the office, bring the case, and we shall consider if my indulgence continues." I fetched the case from the safe and brought it upstairs, its weight no less troubling than the night before. Wolfe looked at it as though it had invaded his linen, then waved me to return it once he'd made his point. The ritual of lock and key was already becoming tiresome, but his command was law. I sealed it away again and went back to my desk, the safe's silence heavier than ever, and the world outside went on with horns and rumbling trucks. Inside, the air grew thick with Wolfe's annoyance. By 11, he came down for his orchid session, and I knew better than to interfere. He went through the office without acknowledging me, carrying himself toward the greenhouse with the gravity of a judge entering chambers. When he emerged 2 hours later, refreshed from his orchids, he summoned me once more. "Archie, mark my words, that case is a magnet for misfortune. There will be inquiries. Kramer may come, perhaps others. Guard your tongue. Admit nothing beyond what I decree." The phone rang then, jangling with too much insistence. I caught the receiver. A voice I knew well, Saul again, clipped and dry. "Archie? That girl, Miss Harcourt, didn't go home last night. I checked. She's not been seen since she stepped from that cab." I kept my tone steady, though my stomach tightened. "You're sure?" "Positive. I'll keep looking, but it smells bad." I hung up, and Wolfe's eyes narrowed at my expression. "Well?" I told him plain and short. His mouth flattened into a line. He reached for the bell cord and pulled. Fritz appeared in the doorway, immaculate as always. "Beer," Wolfe ordered. "Cold glass." Fritz vanished, silent as a shadow. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "So," he said, "we are no longer custodians only. We are participants willy-nilly. The woman has vanished. Presently, Archie, you will learn whether she has merely strayed or whether her life is indeed forfeit." Fritz returned with the chilled bottle and glass, setting them carefully on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe poured, the foam rising just shy of the lip. He drank half, then set the glass down with decision. "This is insufferable," he muttered, "my life ordered by the caprices of a stranger. Yet she chose well, Archie, damn her. We are entangled." I sat back, watching him. The case in the safe might have been ticking like a bomb for all the peace it promised us. Evelyn Harcourt had dropped it in our laps, and now, with Saul's report hanging in the air, it seemed only a matter of time before the knock came on our door. Archie Goodwin here, and the day had hardly grown respectable before the world barged in. I had just finished a glass of milk in the kitchen when the phone rang again, more insistent than before. I got it on the second ring. The city desk of the Gazette wanted comment, which I declined with my usual charm. Then came the call that mattered. Inspector Kramer's voice carried the rasp of cigar smoke and impatience. "Goodwin, put Wolfe on. And don't stall. Your Miss Harcourt turned up this morning on 34th near Penn. Dead." The words hit like a chair to the chest. I kept my tone level. "That so? What was she doing there?" "Bleeding on the pavement with a knife under her ribs. Don't play dumb. She came to you yesterday. I want Wolfe." I covered the receiver. Wolfe sat at his desk, eyes closed, fingertips pressed together. I relayed it in a sentence. His lids lifted slowly, heavy as stone. "Tell him," Wolfe said, "that I do not relish interruptions before lunch, but he may come if he insists." I returned to the phone. "Inspector, he says you're welcome. Bring cigars for atmosphere." Kramer grunted and hung up. By the time he arrived, the brownstone had settled into a brittle quiet. Fritz had withdrawn to his kitchen, the smells of stock and onions floating faintly down the hall. Wolfe remained at his desk, refusing to budge an inch. I opened the door to Kramer's pounding fist and admitted him. He came in with the air of a man who already suspected guilt, hat low, cigar clamped hard. "All right, Wolfe," he growled, stepping into the office. "Out with it. The girl came here. What did she leave?" Wolfe gestured toward the red chair. "Sit, Inspector. Your bluster may be more effective at a higher altitude, but here it is wasted. I know no more than you. Miss Harcourt presented a locked case, which I declined to examine. It rests secure." Kramer's jaw worked. "Then open it." "No," Wolfe said. The word was flat, immovable. "Not yet." Kramer shot me a look. "Goodwin, don't play games. Where's the case?" "In the safe," I said. "Locked, same as yesterday." She insisted. He indulged. Kramer stood, loomed, then sat again with a curse. "You're shielding something. Her body was found 2 blocks from Penn Station, knife in her back, no witnesses worth a nickel. And you expect me to believe she gave you her keepsake chest for sentimental reasons?" Wolfe sipped from his chilled glass. "I expect you to believe precisely what I said." The woman was frightened. She sought refuge. I offered it in the form of iron and steel. Kramer leaned forward, stabbing the air with his cigar. "Then you'll surrender it to me." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "I will not. Not without proper warrant. Do not presume to bully me in my own house." The room held its breath. Kramer's eyes narrowed, then shifted to me. "Goodwin, if I find you obstructing, I'll haul you down to Center Street and sweat you until your wisecracks run dry." I smiled. I've always wanted to tour the facilities. He slammed a palm on the arm of the chair. "Damn you both. All right, Wolfe. Sit on it if you like, but when the commissioner hears, you'll wish you hadn't." He rose, jammed his hat down, and stamped toward the door. "I'll be back, with paper that forces your hand." When the front door shut behind him, the quiet returned, heavier than before. Wolfe breathed deep, eyes closed. "Archie," he said, "henceforth the case must be guarded without lapse. You will sleep in this room if necessary. Our tranquility has expired." "Fine," I said. "But you realize the inspector isn't bluffing. He'll come back with the warrant." "Let him," Wolfe murmured. "Meanwhile, we must know what we protect. After lunch, we shall open it." I looked at the safe. It sat silent, mute, indifferent to the storm it contained. Evelyn Harcourt was dead on a city sidewalk, and her locked case was ours to answer for. Archie Goodwin again, and if you want the chronology neat, here's how it went. Kramer stormed out just before lunch, and Wolfe rang the bell pull for Fritz, with the same slow authority he would use to summon a monarch. Lunch arrived at 1, as always. Oxtail soup, a fricassee of chicken with morels, and a salad with tarragon. Wolfe gave the meal its full respect, chewing with the solemnity of a judge. He did not mention Evelyn Harcourt, nor Kramer, nor the case. That was Wolfe's method. Let the world spin, but never permit it to spin you faster than your appointed orbit. I, on the other hand, had no appetite. Fritz's soup deserved applause, yet I kept thinking of Evelyn sprawled on the sidewalk, the life spilled from her by someone who considered her an obstacle. My spoon chased circles around the bowl until Wolfe barked, "Archie, cease that childish performance. Either consume or desist." So I ate, though the taste turned chalky. When Fritz cleared the last plate and brought in the compote, Wolfe leaned back, dabbed his lips and said, "Now we address the case." I'd been waiting for that. We returned to the office. The leather case waited in the safe, silent and heavy, as though aware of its turn on stage. Wolfe sat, motioned, and I fetched it. He examined it without touching, his eyes tracing the scuffs on the brass corners, the worn handle, the faint scrape on one side. "A woman's case," he muttered, "but sturdy. She carried it often. Locked, but a lock is meaningless. Open it, Archie." I drew my picks from the drawer, kneeled and worked the clasp. It yielded after a minute's persuasion with a soft click. I lifted the lid. Inside was a sheaf of folded tissue, precise and tidy, and within that a single object, a passport, navy blue, edges rubbed from use. I drew it out and placed it before Wolfe. He did not touch it at first, his gaze fixed on the embossed eagle, then he motioned again. "Open." I flipped it open. The name read, Evelyn Harcourt. But the photograph, sharp and recent, showed another woman entirely. Hair darker, jaw firmer, eyes colder. Not Evelyn. "Well," I said, "Our Lady had an alter ego." "Not alter," Wolfe said, leaning closer. "Forgery. Observe. The paste is exact, but the cutting imperfect at the lower edge. Sloppy." He extended one finger, not quite touching. She carried proof of substitution. This was her peril. I turned the pages. Visas stamped for Canada, Britain, and one for Lisbon. Travel across the Atlantic in the last year, though Evelyn had claimed no such journeys in her brief talk with me. "Quite a traveller," I remarked. "Not she," Wolfe replied. "The woman pictured. The document enabled another to move as Miss Harcourt. A dangerous convenience." The room seemed smaller. The city noise outside pressed against the windows, and I imagined Evelyn clutching this passport, her life tied to it. No wonder she trembled. Wolfe's eyes closed. He breathed through his nose, slow and deep. "Archie, what do you infer?" "That she stumbled on a fraud big enough to scare her stiff," I said. "She thought hiding it here would save her. It didn't." "Precisely. Who profits from such a substitution? A woman needing entry where her own name forbids. The counterfeit required access to materials, skilled hands, and purpose. Consider who Miss Harcourt knew." I paced. She worked for Henry Barstow, shipping firm, access to manifests, foreign cargo. She shared an apartment with Maria Kent, who had her own friends. She visited a Colonel Van Dreer, ex-military, well-connected. And there's Geraldine Lyle, the aunt who wanted a slice of family secrets. Any of them could want a forged passport. Wolfe nodded, eyes still closed. "You will investigate, but not yet. First, telephone Saul. He must follow the shadows that trailed her yesterday. They may reappear." I dialed. Saul answered with his usual brevity. I gave him the order. His reply was simple. "Done." He rang off. When I hung up, Wolfe spoke again. "Archie, guard that document. Replace it in the safe, but keep a duplicate made discreetly. A photograph, you will arrange it." "Sure," I said. "But Kramer's going to be back with a warrant. He'll want the real thing." "And he shall have it," Wolfe murmured. "But not until I am prepared. Meanwhile, the initiative is ours." I returned the passport to its tissue, placed it back in the case, and locked it in the safe. Yet the image lingered, the wrong face staring from the page, daring me to guess her name. By mid-afternoon, the office grew heavy with quiet. Wolfe read, I paced, Fritz rattled pans in the kitchen. Then the telephone rang again. This time it was not Saul. It was a voice I knew too well. Kramer. Harsh. Direct. "Goodwin, I'm coming with a paper. Be ready." He hung up. I relayed it. Wolfe sighed. "So, we must surrender. Still, knowledge once gained cannot be erased. We have seen. That is sufficient." Minutes later the bell clanged. I opened the door to Kramer, warrant in hand, cigar clenched like a weapon. He barged in, threw the paper on Wolfe's desk and barked, "Produce the case." Wolfe read the warrant with disdain. "Valid. Archie, comply." I fetched the case, set it on the desk and opened it. The passport lay within, mute. Kramer snatched it, flipped through the pages and swore. "What the hell is this? It's Harcourt's passport, but with somebody else's mug. You knew this." "I knew it the instant I examined it," Wolfe said coolly. "Until then, no." Kramer glared. "This is evidence. You'll explain yourself." "I shall do no such thing. I kept the article secure as requested. That is all." Kramer stuffed the passport into an envelope, scrawled his initials, and rose. "Don't think you're off the hook, Wolfe. This ties you in tighter than ever. If this turns into international mess, the commissioner will roast you alive." He stamped out, slamming the door. When the echoes died, Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and muttered, "Phooey, let him bluster. The problem remains ours." I looked at the safe, now empty. Our advantage was gone, but Wolfe seemed unworried. "Archie," he said, "begin inquiries. Barstow first. The woman's employment is the soil. We shall dig there." So I did. I phoned for an appointment, donned my hat, and stepped into the late afternoon. Manhattan's air carried the tang of hot asphalt and exhaust, the hum of traffic rising like an orchestra. Barstow's office on Pearl Street was tidy, brass nameplate shining, clerks tapping typewriters. Henry Barstow himself was lean, grey-templed, with a smile that never warmed. He welcomed me politely, but his eyes darted to the side drawers of his desk when I asked about Evelyn. "She was efficient," he said, "though distracted lately. I cannot imagine why anyone would harm her." "Maybe because she carried a passport with the wrong face in it," I said, watching him closely. His hand twitched toward a drawer, then pulled back. "I know nothing of that. Her personal matters were her own." I left with little more than suspicion, yet Wolfe would pass it. Back at the brownstone, twilight deepened. Wolfe sat in the office, sipping beer in his chilled glass. I reported. He listened without comment, then closed his eyes. "Good," he said. "Enough for tonight. Tomorrow we pursue further. Tonight we consider. The passport reveals a masquerade. Our task is to learn whose face it wears, and who killed to keep it hidden." He drained his glass, set it down, and leaned back, already dismissing the world for the comfort of his orchids. I looked at the safe, now echoing hollow. Evelyn Harcourt had entrusted us with her secret. We had unlocked it, and it led straight to her death. Whoever forged that passport was still out there, clever, dangerous, and ready to kill again. Archie Goodwin again, and the next morning broke with Wolfe in one of his blacker moods. Fritz carried up the breakfast tray as usual, shirred eggs, broiled squab, toast cut with the precision of a draftsman, but Wolfe hardly acknowledged it. He sent me a summons through the ceiling before I'd finished my first cup of coffee in the kitchen. When I climbed to his room, he was already propped up, chewing with the determination of a man insulted by food. "Archie," he said, not bothering with preamble, "Henry Barstow is central." "That's what you said last night." "And I say it again. Your account of his unease, his hand straying to the drawer, it stinks of concealment. Today you will pry him open. Begin at his office. Be circumspect, but obtain the truth." "Circumspect, sure," I said, "but if he's tied to forged passports, I doubt he'll hand me a brochure." Wolfe grunted, and that was the end of breakfast talk. By 10 I was on the subway to Pearl Street. The trains rumbled, swayed, and delivered me to the shipping district with the usual perfume of oil, sea salt, and humanity pressed too close. Barstow's firm occupied a suite overlooking the river, with brass rails polished bright and clerks bent to their ledgers like monks. I gave my name and was shown in. Henry Barstow greeted me with the same fixed smile, though it looked more brittle today. He wore a navy suit, the tie neatly knotted, but his eyes betrayed the kind of man who rehearsed answers before questions were asked. "Goodwin," he said, "have you found the monster who killed poor Evelyn?" "Not yet," I said, lowering into the chair across from him, "but her passport turned up in interesting condition." He stiffened. "Passport? What do you mean?" "Let's skip the act. You know she had one with somebody else's face pasted in. Police have it now. They'll trace where it came from, and I expect that trail runs through your little empire here." Colour drained from his cheeks, but he forced a laugh. "Ridiculous. We ship cargo, not photographs." I leaned forward. "Cargo that goes overseas. Cargo that passes customs if the paperwork looks right. Evelyn worked your ledgers. She could have known every box, every manifest, every discrepancy. and she could have known which names required help slipping past a guard. He opened his mouth, then shut it again. His hand twitched toward the drawer once more, as if the secret inside was burning him. "Tell me," I pressed, "was Evelyn running errands for you or for somebody who pays better?" His smile collapsed. He shoved back his chair, stood and paced to the window. "You think I would involve myself in fraud? Preposterous." "Then why the twitch at the drawer?" He turned, eyes sharp, voice tight. "Because that drawer contains correspondence of a personal nature, nothing to do with business. I will not have it pored over by detectives. That is all." "Maybe," I said, rising, "but I'll be back. And next time you may have Inspector Kramer breathing down your neck." He winced at the name. That told me plenty. I left the office with his brittle smile echoing behind me. The man was sitting on something hot, and Evelyn had burned her fingers trying to hold it. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, orchids attended to, and his bulk arranged behind the desk, like a general awaiting a report. I laid out the details, the twitch, the draw, the flinch at Kramer's name. Wolfe listened, eyes closed, head tilted. "He fears exposure," Wolfe said at length. "And the fear is personal, not merely professional. He is entangled. But whether he killed to protect himself, that is the question." Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. I went to it. A messenger stood with a sealed envelope. He offered no name, only a shrug when I asked. I tipped him and brought it back. Wolfe slit it with the paper knife. Inside was a single sheet. Typed words, clipped and cold. "Keep away from Barstow. Keep away from the passport, or the next body will be yours." Wolfe read it twice, then handed it across. His expression did not change, but his voice thickened with contempt. An attempt at intimidation. Childish. Still, it affirms our direction. "Somebody's nervous," I said. "Indeed, and nervous men make errors." The clock ticked past noon. Fritz entered, discreet as always, to announce luncheon preparations. Wolfe waved him away. "Archie," he said, "continue your pressure on Barstow. His mask will crack. Meanwhile, Saul will shadow him. Inform Saul at once." I phoned Saul, who answered with his habitual brevity. He took the assignment without comment, merely a flat right, and hung up. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing again, fingers steepled. The passport was a lever. Evelyn sought to move something heavy. It crushed her instead. We must learn what weight she dared to shift. He rang the bell pull. Fritz reappeared, this time with Wolfe's beer, the glass frosted, the amber liquid gleaming. Wolfe drank deeply, set it down, and exhaled like a man tolerating the world only because beer existed. As for me, I sat back, milk glass in hand, thinking of Evelyn's pale face and Barstow's twitching jaw. The passport had drawn blood once already. The question was how many more would fall before Wolfe pried the truth out of the lies. Archie Goodwin again, and when Wolfe orders, I deliver. The hour had just slid past 5, the November dusk folding itself over the city in layers of smoke and neon, when I reached the corner Saul had marked. He stood there, cap pulled low, as anonymous as a postbox, yet alert in the way only Saul could be. He gave me a glance, barely a twitch, and that was enough. I drifted closer, my pace casual, as though I were a man killing time before dinner. "Inside," Saul said without moving his lips. "Barstow's been there 20 minutes. He came out once to look around, went back quick. He's nervous." The hotel was one of those mid-tier places built to hide rather than welcome. Velvet curtains shut the street away. The brass rail on the steps needed polish, and the clerk behind the desk smoked too much. I walked past once, then circled back, pausing at the corner store to buy a paper bag of peanuts I didn't want. Saul stayed at his lamppost, his silhouette cut neat against the glow of the streetlight. I crossed into the hotel lobby. The air smelled of stale smoke and cologne poured with a heavy hand. The clerk eyed me, then shifted to study the door again, the way men do when they want to appear invisible. I took a seat on a battered couch near the elevator and flipped open my peanut bag. The place was quiet, but for the occasional creak of the stair and the buzz of a neon sign outside. 10 minutes later, Barstow appeared. He wore the same navy suit, but less of the smile. His hat brim shaded his eyes, yet his hand shook as he adjusted it. He wasn't alone. A man taller than he stood beside him, broad in the shoulders, overcoat tailored, shoes polished to a military shine. He had a soldier's carriage, crisp even in a shabby lobby. The Colonel, Vandrea. They crossed toward the exit. I rose, casual, tossed the peanuts into a bin, and moved to intercept. Barstow saw me, faltered and paled. Vandrea kept moving, only a twitch in his jaw betraying recognition. They brushed past. "Evening, gentlemen," I said pleasantly. Barstow stammered. Vandrea gave me the sort of nod you say for waiters. They left. I followed at distance, not close enough to spook them, but near enough to track their cab. Saul slipped from his lamppost and joined me at the curb. "Where?" he asked. "Watch and learn," I said. They hailed a taxi. Saul whistled low, and a second cab rolled up, his doing. We slid inside, and the driver followed at half a block. The city smeared past, the glow of shop fronts bleeding into the dark. The cab ahead turned south, then east, heading into districts where no colonel should have business. Finally, it pulled up near a building that smelled of ink and paper even from the curb, a print shop, dark except for a rear window. "They're forging," Saul murmured. "Looks like." We watched as Barstow and Vandrea vanished through a side door. No one else moved on the street. Saul adjusted his cap. "We could nose in." I shook my head. Wolfe said eyes, not action. So we waited. Minutes dragged, the street empty but for the rustle of newspapers blowing from a bin. At last the door opened again. A different man emerged, slender, hat pulled low, carrying a portfolio tight under his arm. He locked the door, glanced around, and strode away briskly. His stride was practiced, the kind that eats blocks without hurry. "That," Saul said softly, "is Ames." We followed 2 blocks, careful. He cut into a diner, ordered coffee, sat alone. Through the plate glass we saw his face under the light. Sharp jaw, eyes restless, lips compressed as if silence were currency. I filed it away. "Enough," Saul said. "We'll lose them if we linger." We broke off and returned uptown. Saul vanished into the night as smoothly as he had arrived. I took a cab back to the brownstone, rehearsing the report. Inside, Fritz had the lamps lit, their glow throwing warmth over the polished wood. Wolfe sat in his yellow chair, a book closed on his lap. He looked up as I entered. "Well?" he asked. I gave him the bare facts. Barstow with Vandrea, the print shop, the portfolio in Ames's hands. He listened without interruption, eyes closed, lips pressed thin. When I finished, he exhaled. "So, we have a triumvirate, Barstow the facilitator, Vandrea the sponsor, and Ames the executor." Miss Harcourt touched their scheme, perhaps clumsily. They silenced her. I poured myself milk, cold from the icebox. "Why use her passport?" "Convenience," Wolfe said. "She had access. Perhaps she was asked to aid. She refused, but not before she learned too much." Barstow then enlisted another woman's face to replace hers. The colonel required safe passage abroad, untraceable. Ames supplied the craft. I leaned against the desk. "That puts motive square on Vandrea." "Indeed," Wolfe said. "And yet, too direct. I distrust conclusions reached too swiftly. We require more. Tomorrow, you will confront Vandrea himself." He reached for his beer, Fritz having anticipated the request and set it ready. He drank, then set the glass down with a click. "Archie, we are close, but the last barrier is not yet broken. Patience." He closed his eyes, the bulk of him sinking deeper into the chair, already dismissing me for the night. I finished my milk, the taste cold and steady, and thought of Evelyn Harcourt, who had believed a safe could save her. She was wrong, but Wolfe was rarely wrong, and he had marked his quarry. The next move was ours, Archie Goodwin again, and the following morning Wolfe wasted no time reminding me that leisure was for him alone. Breakfast had barely vanished from his room when his voice came booming through the ceiling. I'd been enjoying a calm glass of milk with Fritz, who was experimenting with some Swiss tart for dinner, but duty called. When I entered the office, Wolfe was already at his desk, the latest issue of current biography lying unopened beside him. His bulk was centered in the yellow chair, eyes half closed, mouth set in the kind of line that meant he had been thinking since he left bed. "Archie," he said, "today you will attend Colonel Vandrea." I leaned on the desk. "All right. Do you want polite Archie or probing Archie?" "Neither. Be the Archie who returns with facts. Do not dissemble with him. He will expect confrontation, and he will attempt intimidation. Do not yield." "Sounds like an enjoyable outing," I said. He flicked his hand. "Enough. Report when you return." That was Wolfe's way of saying he wanted no interruptions until Orchids at 9. By mid-morning, I was in a cab, headed north to Vandria's residence. The Colonel had chosen a brownstone on Riverside Drive, not unlike Wolfe's, but with military efficiency replacing grace. The front steps were scrubbed to a polish, brass knocker gleamed, and the curtains had the rigid pull of a parade ground flag. The maid who answered had the spine of a drill sergeant, but she admitted me after I presented my card. I was shown into a library with books lined in perfect alignment, a globe gleaming, and the faint smell of pipe tobacco that no cleaning could mask. Colonel Vandria entered in full stride, grey hair clipped to regulation, chin sharp enough to cut cloth. He wore a tailored suit that might as well have been a uniform, so stiff was his bearing. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, voice clipped. "What is your business?" I smiled. "The usual. Murder, forged documents, and your name floating at the centre." His eyes narrowed. "Careful." "I'm always careful," I said, dropping into a chair without invitation. "You knew Evelyn Harcourt. She came to see you asking for papers. Now she's dead. Care to comment?" His jaw twitched. The girl was misguided. She imagined herself important, meddling where she had no standing. I told her as much. If she is dead, I regret it, but it is no concern of mine. "That's a heartwarming eulogy," I said. "But she carried a passport with another woman's face in it. You smoke Turkish cigarettes, and a trace of ash showed up where it shouldn't. You want to keep saying no concern of yours?" The Colonel's face darkened, but his voice remained steady. "You presume much. A soldier keeps many habits. That is no crime." "Neither is being honest," I said. "But the truth is you were mixed up with Barstow, and a man named Ames carried the product of your little meeting. Do you deny it?" For the first time he faltered. His hand closed around the edge of the desk, whitening at the knuckles. "You follow me too closely, Goodwin. If Wolfe sent you to accuse, tell him this. A man who lived through 2 wars does not fear words." I stood. "Then maybe you'll fear what comes next, because Kramer is breathing down Wolfe's neck, and if he learns you were seen with Barstow in a print shop, the questions won't be so polite." That cracked the armour. The Colonel's mouth compressed, eyes flashing. "Leave my house. Now." I left, but not before marking the tremor in his hand as he reached for the doorknob. Outside, the river wind cut cold. I pulled my coat tighter and caught a cab back to the brownstone. Wolfe was waiting, eyes closed, hands steepled. I gave the report short and sharp. His only response was a grunt. "He denies, of course," Wolfe murmured, "but the denial is not complete. He fears exposure. Barstow is his partner, Ames his craftsman. The motive for Miss Harcourt's death rests between them. We require the missing element, the purpose of their enterprise." Maria looked worse than the day before, sleepless and strung tight. "I didn't tell you everything," she admitted, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "The night before she died, Evelyn fought with her Aunt Geraldine. I heard it through the door. Geraldine accused her of dragging the family name into ruin. Evelyn swore she would rather die than let Barstow and Vandria prosper. When the door closed, I picked up the case, weighed it. She's right about one thing. This puts Barstow in her room." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "A gift, perhaps. Still, it confirms association deeper than employer and clerk. That strengthens motive." The evening fell with a sense of tightening coils. Wolfe spent his orchid hours in silence. I made calls, lining up discreet checks on Barstow's finances. Saul phoned once to say he was still on Barstow's trail, shadowing his movements. He gave no details, just the assurance he was breathing down the man's neck. At dinner, Wolfe ate well, Fritz presenting veal with chanterelles. Wolfe chewed slowly, eyes fixed on the middle distance, mind turning. Afterward, in the office, he sipped beer and finally spoke. "Archie, the elements converge. Barstow supplies cover, Vandria supplies purpose, Ames supplies craft. Miss Harcourt stumbled upon them, attempted resistance and paid. But motive is not yet crystal. Tomorrow you will press Maria further. She knows more than she admits." I nodded. "You think she's holding back?" "Of course. She would not risk bringing that case unless she calculated the benefit. She is not innocent." The clock struck 11. Wolfe closed his eyes. Enough. Tomorrow. I sat with my milk staring at the silver case on the desk. Evelyn's ghost seemed to linger in the room, her trust still locked into the safe that no longer held her secret. But Wolfe had the scent, and the Colonel's composure had cracked. It would not be long before the whole rotten scheme tumbled out. Archie Goodwin here, and the next morning brought me the kind of chore Wolfe reserves for me alone, pressing a woman who had already shown herself half hysterical. By 10, I was on my way to Maria Kent's address, a modest building on the Upper West Side with peeling paint and a landlady who demanded 50 cents to point me to the right floor. I climbed the steps, knocked, and Maria herself opened. She looked as though she hadn't slept, hair pinned haphazardly, robe clutched close. "You again," she said flatly. "Me again," I answered. "And unless you want Wolfe himself to appear, which won't happen, you'll talk to me." She let me in without further word. The apartment was cramped, curtains drawn, the air carrying the faint scent of stale perfume. 2 chairs, a table, and the ghost of Evelyn's presence in every corner. Maria perched on the edge of a chair, lighting a cigarette with quick fingers. "What do you want now?" "Facts, I said. "Last time you gave us a cigarette case and a speech. Wolfe thinks you've got more, and he's usually right." Her eyes flashed. "You think I enjoyed handing over something that might condemn a man? You think I don't fear the same knife?" "Fear doesn't change the truth," I said. "You knew Evelyn's movements better than anyone. She told you things she didn't tell Wolfe. Out with it." She dragged on the cigarette, exhaled hard. "She said Vandria promised her protection if she helped him, but she never trusted him. She thought Barstow was playing both sides, feeding information abroad while pretending loyalty here. She wanted to expose him. She said she had proof." I leaned forward. "What kind of proof?" Maria shook her head. "She never showed me, only said it would ruin him, and maybe others too. She thought Wolfe could keep it safe." That much we already knew, but her next words were new. "The night before she went to you, she argued with her aunt Geraldine. I heard them shouting through the door. Geraldine accused her of betraying the family name, of dragging secrets into the light. Evelyn told her she would rather die than let men like Barstow and Vandria prosper." "Geraldine," I said slowly. "She never mentioned that." Maria stubbed out the cigarette with a jab. "No, because she still believed family meant something. She thought her aunt would come around, but Geraldine's greed makes her blind. You should watch her." I filed that neatly. Geraldine had visited Wolfe once already, asking for the passport. Now the quarrel gave it a new angle. Maria rose, began pacing. "I've said enough. I won't end up like Evelyn." I stood too. "Suit yourself. But if you keep choking down the truth, you'll help the wrong people walk free. Wolfe won't thank you for that." She turned away, and that was my dismissal. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was at his desk, orchids done, lunch still an hour off. I reported without embroidery. He listened, eyes closed, face impassive. "Geraldine Lyle," he said at last. "Yes, the aunt's claim was inheritance, but her quarrel with the girl points to more. If Miss Harcourt threatened exposure, Geraldine might have feared disgrace or worse. Our circle broadens." "Too broad," I said. "We've got Barstow twitching, Vandria blustering, Ames lurking, and now Geraldine with a motive." "Pfui," Wolfe murmured. "It is not breadth we seek, but depth. Geraldine must be tested. Summon her." I phoned. The woman's voice came sharp as cut glass, but she agreed to come that afternoon. When she arrived, she swept in with the confidence of a matron accustomed to obedience. Her fur collar brushed the chair as she sat, chin high, eyes bright with disdain. "Well, Mr. Wolfe," she began, "have you come to your senses? Will you hand over what belongs to me?" Wolfe ignored the bluster. "Madam, you quarrelled with your niece the night before her death. She declared she would not permit men to profit by fraud. You attempted to silence her." Geraldine stiffened. "That is a lie." "Your neighbour heard you," Wolfe said. "Your words were sharp. You demanded she abandon her course. Why?" Her hands clenched. She risked exposing family matters better left buried. Her father was not the saint she imagined. If she forced the truth into daylight, she would have destroyed his memory and ruined me with gossip. I begged her to desist. "Begged or threatened?" I asked. Her eyes flared. "I loved her. Though she was headstrong, I would never harm her." Wolfe's lids lowered. "Yet you pressed me for the passport. insisting it contained proof of your claim. You are too eager, madam. Desire for property clouds your protestations of love. Geraldine rose abruptly. You twist everything. If you persist, I shall instruct my attorney. Do, Wolfe said calmly. Meanwhile, I will pursue facts. She stormed out, perfume trailing, the slam of the front door vibrating the hall. I turned to Wolfe. She's rattled. Yes, he said, but not broken. Still, she confirms the quarrel. That corroborates Maria. Another stone added. The afternoon waned. Saul telephoned briefly. Barstow and Ames had met again, this time in a cafe near the docks. Saul trailed them long enough to note secrecy, but not words. Wolfe received the report with a grunt and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, he murmured, the net tightens. Tonight, we digest. And digest he did, with Fritz serving trout in almond butter at dinner, while I kept thinking of Geraldine's clenched fists and the tremor in Vandria's hand. Wolfe might appear somnolent, but I knew he was assembling each piece, setting the board for the strike to come. Archie Goodwin again, and the morning started with the sort of stillness that always makes me nervous. Wolfe had gone up from breakfast without a single insult to Fritz's coffee, which meant his mind was tightening around some knot. I was at my desk, halfway through sorting the mail, when the phone rang. Saul's voice came low and even, the way he keeps it when he's carrying something heavy. Archie, I've got something. A pawn receipt, Evelyn's name signed at the bottom. Picked it up after following a thread. That woke me up better than coffee. What was pledged? A woman's handbag. Inside, foreign stamps and a letter in cipher. Pawned the day she disappeared. I whistled softly. Hold it, I'll tell Wolfe. I hung up and gave it to Wolfe in one line. His eyes opened at once, bright with interest despite the half-shut lids. He extended a hand. The receipt. I called Saul back, and within the hour he stepped into the office, cap tugged low, slipping the slip of paper from his coat. Wolfe took it as though it were a jewel. He read, grunted, and passed it to me. A plain pawn ticket, dated the day before Evelyn turned up dead, issued by a shop on the Lower East Side. Description: lady's handbag, contents noted. Archie, Wolfe said, retrieve it. I was already on my feet. Saul offered to come, but Wolfe waved him away. Stay near Barstow. We need eyes on him, not company for Archie. The pawn shop sat on a block that smelled of boiled cabbage and ink. A brass bell jingled as I pushed inside. Behind the counter, a man with thinning hair and an apron raised heavy lids. I presented the receipt, and he rummaged in the back before returning with a canvas-wrapped bundle. Lady pawned it quick, he muttered, looked frightened, never came back. I paid the redemption fee, took the bundle, and left. Back in the brownstone office, I set it on Wolfe's desk. He unwrapped the cloth with deliberate fingers. Out slid a leather handbag, scuffed at the corners. Inside lay a stack of foreign stamps bound by twine and a folded sheet covered with precise markings, not letters, but a lattice of numbers and symbols. Wolfe lifted the letter by its corners, nostrils flaring. Archie, magnifier. I fetched it. He peered, then nodded. A cipher, and more. See the watermark? Paper from a British supply office. Someone in the War Department once handled this. I examined the stamps. Canada, Portugal, France. The same countries marked in the passport's visas. Wolfe's eyes closed, lids heavy as shutters. She collected these as tokens. They mark the passages the counterfeit was meant to traverse. The letter is instructions, coded for discretion. Evelyn hid them here when she realized her peril. He set it down, reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared. Wolfe ordered beer, chilled glass. While Fritz was gone, I turned the letter in my hands. Think Ames wrote this? Likely, Wolfe said. His skill extended beyond forgery. But note, the text is clumsy. Not an expert's work, but an amateur taught just enough. That narrows our suspects. We must learn who had access to such training. Fritz returned with the beer, and Wolfe drank half the glass in one draught. Then he said, Archie, we cannot decode this alone. Call Lon Cohen. Ask if he has a cipher man willing to inspect without blabbing, not police. I phoned. Lon grumbled, then promised to send a fellow he trusted. By 3, the man arrived, a wiry type with spectacles, introduced only as Harriman. He bent over the sheet, muttering, fingers dancing as though on piano keys. Within an hour, he straightened. Simple substitution, he said. Not military grade. It reads as shipping schedules, ports and times. Someone wanted to smuggle men or goods under cover of routine manifests. Wolfe's eyes opened. Which ports? Harriman pointed. Lisbon, Halifax, Southampton. Wolfe dismissed him with payment, then sat silent, lips pursed. So, Barstow provided the manifests, Vandria the contacts, Ames the counterfeit, Geraldine perhaps the motive for silence. Miss Harcourt sought to shield the letter, knowing it proved all. I asked, and the stamps? Diversion, Wolfe said, or currency in another market, but together they form leverage, enough to kill for. The doorbell rang hard. I answered. Kramer pushed in, cigar between teeth, hat jammed low. He looked around as though expecting corpses in the corners. Wolfe, he barked, I hear you've been sniffing around pawn shops. You hear too much, Wolfe said coldly. Then make it official. What did she pawn? Wolfe inclined his head toward me. I summarized. Handbag, stamps, coded letter. I left out Harriman's visit, but Wolfe's glance warned me nothing more was to be hidden. Kramer grunted. Let me see the letter. Wolfe handed it over. Kramer frowned at the symbols, then scowled. You cracked it already, didn't you? Yes, Wolfe said. It ties Barstow's shipping line to clandestine passage. That, Inspector, is why Miss Harcourt died. Kramer chewed his cigar. Then you'll come downtown and put it in writing. No, Wolfe said. I remain here. You may take a copy. I prepared one. Kramer pocketed it, eyes narrowing. If this blows up, Wolfe, you'll be in the middle whether you like it or not. Phooey, Wolfe murmured. I am always in the middle. Kramer stamped out. The office settled again, though the letter's presence kept the air taut. Wolfe drained his glass. Archie, summon the others soon. Our stage nears completion, but not yet. We need Barstow pushed harder. Saul will oblige. I nodded, poured myself milk and leaned back. The handbag lay open, mute evidence of Evelyn's last defiance. She had hidden it in a pawn shop, trusting anonymity to guard what her life could not. Now it sat on Wolfe's desk, decoded and damning, and the men it condemned were still free, moving in the city's shadows, unaware that Wolfe had them measured. The night pressed against the windows, horns rising from the avenue, the hum of the city at work. Wolfe sat, eyes closed again, lips set, already turning the cipher's revelations into the next blow. I stayed at my desk, watching, knowing the noose was drawing tight. Archie Goodwin again, and the morning after the pawnshop recovery started on a note of Wolfe's particular brand of gloom. He ate breakfast in bed without complaint, which told me he was chewing on deductions as heavy as Fritz's bread rolls. By the time I carried my second glass of milk into the office, Wolfe had descended and was already behind his desk, lips pursed, fingers steepled. Archie, he said, Barstow's alibi must be tested. Saul observed him with Ames and Vandria, yet he claimed to be elsewhere when Miss Harcourt died. We must crack that shield. That was my cue. I picked up the phone, dialed one of my own sources, and within an hour I was headed downtown. The man who owed me a favour was a maitre d' at a small restaurant where Barstow insisted he'd been dining the night of Evelyn's death. He met me by the kitchen door, wiped his hands and frowned. Barstow, he said. He was here, yes, but not the whole night. Came in late, stayed less than an hour, then hurried out. He asked me to say he'd been here longer if anyone inquired. I didn't like it, but he tipped well. That was enough for Wolfe. When I returned and laid it out, he allowed himself a small, satisfied grunt. So, his alibi collapses. He required Maria Kent to repeat his fabrication, and she complied out of fear or affection. Either way, the lie is brittle. Before we could enjoy the progress, the bell rang. This time it was Maria herself, pale but determined. She stepped into the office and stood by the red chair rather than sit. I need to correct something, she said quickly. Barstow asked me to say he was home the night Evelyn died. I did, because I was afraid. But he wasn't home. I don't know where he was. I'm telling you now, because I can't live with the lie. Wolfe regarded her, lids drooping. You are late, madam. Mr. Goodwin has already demonstrated the falsehood. Still, your admission is welcome. Maria trembled. Then you know he killed her. No, Wolfe said sharply. We know only that he lied. That is not equivalent. She clasped her hands. He wanted her gone. You must see it. Wolfe waved her off. Leave us, madam. Further theatrics will not help. She left in a flurry of tears and perfume. Wolfe shut his eyes. Her desperation condemns her more than Barstow. She may not have wielded the knife, but she conceals something vital. The afternoon brought Saul with a fresh report. He had tracked Ames from the cafe to a second meeting, this time not with Barstow, but with Geraldine Lyle. The detail jolted even Wolfe. She handed him an envelope, Saul said. I couldn't see contents. They parted quick. Wolfe muttered, So, our matron is less innocent than she claimed. Her eagerness for the passport, her quarrel with the girl, and now contact with the forger. She may have financed the enterprise. I asked. Then why kill Evelyn? Money's one thing, but murder? Control, Wolfe said. If the girl threatened exposure, Geraldine may have pressed Ames to remove the threat. The picture grew murkier rather than clear, but Wolfe thrived on murk. He ordered Saul to keep watch on Geraldine, then dismissed him. That evening, as Fritz prepared dinner, I paid a call to Maria again, hoping pressure might loosen her tongue further. She answered in a dressing gown, eyes red. Why can't you leave me alone? She cried. Because Wolfe doesn't like holes in the story, I said. You're hiding one. She sagged against the doorframe. Evelyn told me Barstow promised her passage abroad if she helped him. She laughed at it, said she'd never leave. She thought he was ridiculous. But then she found something. Papers, maybe. She never showed me, but she hid them. I think that's why he panicked. It wasn't much, but it added shade to the portrait. When I brought it back, Wolfe opened his eyes. Good. She confirms what the pawned handbag suggested. Miss Harcourt gathered leverage and refused to yield it. That alone could have provoked death. The night stretched quiet, but Wolfe was restless. He paced, rare for him, 2 steps, then sat again, muttering, Too many threads, too much eagerness from each. I must strip this down. Morning came grey but dry. Wolfe sent me straight to Vandria's club to test his alibi. The colonel had sworn he'd been playing bridge with old comrades. They confirmed it, but Saul, planted nearby, had already timed his movements and shown the alibi impossible. When I returned with the mismatch, Wolfe's lips curved. So, both Barstow and Vandria lied. Lies are masks. Each mask hides the same wound. Just then the bell clanged. Kramer strode in, cigar clenched, eyes blazing. He dropped a folder on Wolfe's desk. Autopsy, he said. The girl died earlier than we thought. Around 7, not near midnight. Which means all your suspects were moving free, not tied down by their stories. Wolfe took the folder, skimmed and nodded. Thank you, Inspector. That changes the pattern. Kramer jabbed his cigar at Wolfe. I don't know what you're hiding, but when I crack this, I'll drag you in too. He stomped out. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed. So, the time is earlier. Barstow, Vandria, Geraldine all had opportunity. The alibis, already broken, collapse entirely. He opened his eyes and fixed me with a stare. Archie, the game nears its close. Soon we summon them all, but not yet. Tomorrow you will press Ames. He is the craftsman. He knows whose hand guided the knife. I nodded, though I doubted Ames would sing without leverage. Still, Wolfe's confidence was the one anchor in the storm. That night the brownstone was unusually quiet. Wolfe retired early, Fritz tidied the kitchen, and I sat in the office staring at the handbag and the cipher copy. Pieces lay on the table, and Wolfe's mind was already arranging them for the final stroke. I only hoped we got there before Kramer returned with handcuffs. Wolfe had the passport open again under the lamp, magnifier in hand. Not content with its forgery, he was probing deeper. On the inner crease of the binding he teased out a fleck of pale ash, grey as dust. Turkish tobacco, he murmured. Colonel Vandria leaves his spoor even where he imagines himself invisible. I raised a brow. Every last one? Yes. Barstow, Maria Kent, Geraldine Lyle, Colonel Vandria, Ames. Each will sit here and listen. The truth will emerge. I picked up the phone, drafting terse messages, the kind that give no hint but demand attendance. Messengers carried them out one by one. By mid-afternoon I was restless. Wolfe forbade further errands. Enough, we have all we need, the rest is arrangement. But the office still felt like a powder keg, so I stepped out for a walk, circling the block, watching the taxis idle and the newsboys shout the late edition. When I returned, the brownstone glowed with lamplight. and Wolfe was still in his chair, eyes half closed, rehearsing silently. Dinner that evening was lamb with rosemary, Fritz's doing, and Wolfe ate heavily, fueling himself for tomorrow's theatre. He spoke only once, halfway through the meal. The Colonel's vanity will undo him. He cannot bear accusation. Barstow is weaker, but cunning. Ames is silent by habit. Maria trembles. Geraldine rages. Between them, the interplay will reveal what they would each prefer hidden. Afterward, he returned to the office and summoned me to sit across from him. He demanded I recite every fact in sequence, who was seen, what was said, when each piece surfaced. He interrupted only to correct order or phrasing. The rehearsal lasted until near midnight. Finally, he dismissed me. I left him in the office, lamp still burning, the tiny speck of ash glinting under glass, as though it were a diamond. The next morning was subdued. Wolfe stayed abed later than usual, breakfast untouched until Fritz coaxed him into sipping coffee. He came down close to noon, looking more massive than ever, as if conserving his energy for the evening. He spoke little. I spent the day ensuring the arrangements. Chairs polished, the office tidy, nothing out of place. Fritz prepared a menu lighter than usual. Soup, salad, roast duck, because he knew the evening would run long. Saul phoned briefly to confirm he had eyes on Barstow and would usher him here promptly. At 6, Wolfe permitted a single bottle of beer. He sipped half and set the glass aside. His face was impassive, but I recognized the rare flicker of tension in his brow. At 7, he instructed me, "When they arrive, Archie, seat them in the red chairs. No talking until I begin. If Kramer brings men, admit them, but place them behind. I require silence." "Understood," I said. The first bell came just after 7:30. Geraldine Lyle swept in, fur collar bristling, mouth set like a blade. She sat with an impatient flourish, glaring around the room as though expecting applause. Next came Maria Kent, pale and trembling, eyes darting everywhere but Wolfe's face. She folded her hands tight in her lap, knuckles white. Barstow followed, ushered in by Saul, his smile strained, eyes darting. He lowered himself slowly, as though the chair might bite. Ames slipped in quietly after, carrying himself with the bland anonymity of a man who preferred walls. He sat without word, hands folded neatly. Last came Colonel Vandrea. He entered like a parade, chin high, gaze sweeping the room with contempt. His gloves were tucked in his pocket, and the faint aroma of Turkish tobacco clung to his coat. Kramer arrived just behind him, 2 detectives in tow, hat jammed low, cigar alight. He planted himself near the wall, eyes sharp. At 8 precisely, Wolfe cleared his throat. The room hushed. "You are here," he said, voice calm and sonorous, "because Evelyn Harcourt is dead, and her death was not random. Each of you stands entangled in the web she uncovered. Tonight, I shall strip the lies until the truth remains." His eyes closed, hands steepled. "Miss Harcourt entrusted me with a case. Within it lay a passport bearing her name but another woman's face. That was the fulcrum of your enterprise. From that fulcrum extend 3 supports: Mr. Barstow's shipping manifests, Colonel Vandrea's ambition, and Mr. Ames's craft. Geraldine Lyle supplied motive through family leverage. Maria Kent, though less culpable, supplied cover for lies. Together, you formed a conspiracy." Gasps rose. Geraldine bristled. Barstow sputtered. Maria half rose. Ames stayed stone. Vandrea scowled. Kramer barked, "Quiet." Wolfe continued as though he hadn't heard. "But conspiracy alone does not prove murder. Murder requires proof of the hand that struck. We come now to that proof." He gestured to me. I brought forward the slide holding the fleck of ash. "This," Wolfe said, "rested inside the passport. Not dust, not dirt. Ash from Turkish tobacco. Of you, only Colonel Vandrea smoked such. He handled the passport himself, attempting to ensure its perfection. He left his trace." Vandrea surged up, face dark. "Absurd. Any man might smoke it." "No," Wolfe cut in, voice sharp. "None of these others. Only you. That fleck places you at the heart of the forgery." Vandrea's mouth opened, closed. Sweat gleamed on his brow. "And more," Wolfe pressed. "Your alibi is false. You were seen near the scene at the time the girl died. You killed her because she threatened exposure. She held the cipher letter, the stamps, the passport. She sought to crush your scheme, so you crushed her instead." The silence that followed was suffocating. Barstow's head dropped. Maria's eyes widened with horror. Geraldine's lips parted as if to protest, then snapped shut. Ames remained stone still. Vandrea finally burst. "She was a fool. She meddled in affairs beyond her. Yes, I sought her silence, but—" He stopped, realizing too late what he'd confessed. Kramer was already barking orders, detectives stepping forward. The colonel's proud shoulders sagged as the cuffs clicked on. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, voice quiet. "There, Inspector. Your man?" Kramer gave me a hard look, then grunted. "You win, Wolfe. For now." He herded the suspects out, Vandrea protesting, Geraldine fuming, Barstow pale, Maria shaken, Ames silent. When the last door shut, the office was still again. Wolfe reached for his beer, drained the glass, and set it down with finality. "Archie," he said, eyes closing, "have Fritz clear the chairs. This business is concluded." I nodded, though my mind still held the image of Evelyn's pale face. Justice had come, but too late for her. Still, Wolfe was right. The business was concluded, and the speck of ash had been enough to bring a soldier down. The morning after Vandrea's eruption, Wolfe announced that the colonel's arrest was only a skirmish, not the end of the war. "The conspiracy remains," he told me, "and the others must be made to bare their throats." Instead of summoning every suspect anew, he ordered only Barstow, Geraldine, Maria, and Ames to return. This was not theatre, but an inquest, to prise open what Vandrea's confession had left unresolved. By 7, the brownstone was immaculate. The fire in the grate sent shadows dancing on the polished floor. The orchids perfumed faintly from the greenhouse, and Wolfe's chair gleamed like a throne in the glow of the desk lamp. The first to arrive was Geraldine Lyle. She entered with her usual sweep of furs and indignation, lips taut, eyes glittering with hostility. "This again?" she snapped. "Yes," Wolfe said simply, motioning her to a seat. Barstow arrived next, ushered by Saul, who tipped his cap at me and slid unobtrusively into a corner. Barstow's hands trembled as he removed his gloves, and his smile was weaker than ever. He sat without speaking. Maria Kent came after, pale as chalk, clutching her handbag as if it contained salvation. She chose the farthest chair and lowered her gaze. Ames arrived precisely at 8, silent, neat, carrying himself with the blankness of a man determined to leave no impression. He nodded once and sat. Inspector Kramer stormed in moments later, cigar blazing, detectives in tow. He planted himself by the wall. "You promised me the whole crew," he growled. "You shall have them," Wolfe said calmly. When the clock struck 8, Wolfe shifted in his chair, steepled his fingers, and closed his eyes. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "Colonel Vandrea confessed under pressure. Yet a confession of vanity is not sufficient for me. The truth is broader. This enterprise had many fathers. Tonight, I shall set the record straight." Geraldine bristled. "This is outrageous." "Silence," Wolfe snapped, and for once she obeyed. He opened his eyes, sharp as knives. "The passport we examined was not a solitary whim. It was the product of a concert. Barstow supplied the shipping documents. Ames supplied the counterfeit skill. Geraldine Lyle financed and demanded leverage, and Vandrea intended its use. Evelyn Harcourt discovered enough to imperil you all. Her death was inevitable once she resisted." Barstow shifted, sweat gleaming at his hairline. Maria gasped softly. Ames remained stone still. Geraldine's eyes darted. "But," Wolfe continued, "the act of murder was not executed by Vandrea alone. He sought silence, yes, but others conspired in the act. Consider, the weapon was not military issue, but a common blade. Vandrea was clumsy with tools of subtlety. Someone provided the means, and perhaps the urging." Kramer's brow furrowed, his cigar frozen. Wolfe pointed one finger toward Geraldine. "You, madam, you quarrelled with your niece. You feared exposure of family scandal, and you supplied funds to Ames. You pressed for her silence more than any. Your hand may not have held the knife, but your pressure compelled it." Geraldine leapt up. "Lies. She would have destroyed our family name." "Sit," Wolfe commanded, and she did, trembling. He turned to Barstow. "And you lied about your movements. You sought Maria's aid in the fabrication. You panicked when she refused further. You feared Evelyn's knowledge of the manifests you altered. Your cowardice made you complicit. Barstow stammered. I never touched her. Phooey, you abetted. You knew of the plan and let it proceed. Barstow slumped, hands limp. Wolfe's gaze shifted to Ames. And you, sir. You took Geraldine's money, forged the passport, wrote the cipher. You fancied yourself safe behind silence, but your portfolio was seen, your hand identified. You carried the instrument of fraud, and by doing so, you tethered yourself irrevocably. Ames's lips pressed tighter, but he said nothing. Finally, Wolfe addressed Maria. His voice softened. You are less culpable, but not innocent. You sheltered Barstow's lie, fearing him, perhaps caring for him. Yet you knew Evelyn resisted. You could have spoken earlier. Your silence cost her life. Maria covered her face with her hands. Wolfe leaned back, voice rising. Thus the conspiracy is whole. Geraldine financed, Barstow facilitated, Ames executed the forgery, Vandrea intended use, and together you created the cause of death. Vandrea wielded the knife, but you all paved the way. The room erupted, Geraldine shrieking, Barstow blustering, Maria sobbing, Ames mute. Kramer roared, "Quiet!" and his men stepped forward. Wolfe closed his eyes again, tone final. Inspector, there is your nest. You may distribute blame as law dictates. I have fulfilled my duty. Kramer glared at him, then barked to his men. Round them up. We'll sort charges downtown. The suspects were herded out one by one, their protests filling the hall. When the door slammed on the last of them, silence returned. Wolfe reached for his beer, poured with deliberate care, and drank. He set the glass down with a satisfied sigh. Archie, he said, clear the chairs, then instruct Fritz to bring me roast duck for supper. I am weary of folly. I nodded, though my mind still swam with the faces of those dragged out. Evelyn Harcourt had tried to guard a secret too large for her shoulders. It had crushed her, but Wolfe had taken the burden and turned it back on her enemies. The orchids would get his company tomorrow morning, and the world outside would carry on, none the wiser that justice had been decided in a brownstone on 35th Street. Archie Goodwin here, and if you've ever watched Wolfe when he decides the curtain must rise, you'd know the atmosphere better than any stage play. The office that night was a theatre box. Lamps glowing, chairs aligned, suspects shifting in their seats like unwilling actors, and Wolfe enthroned in his yellow chair, lids half lowered but mind blazing. Inspector Kramer leaned against the wall, cigar clenched, detectives behind him. I stayed at my post near Wolfe's desk, notebook in hand, though my real job was to keep the current from snapping the wires. Wolfe began with a sigh, the kind that fills a room like a timpani note. We return, he said, voice calm, to Miss Evelyn Harcourt. She came to me seeking safety. What she left was not safety, but the fulcrum by which her killers are now undone. He opened his eyes, fixed them on Barstow. We shall start with you. Barstow flinched, his smile a sickly curve. You altered manifests, Wolfe said. You permitted shipments to be disguised, schedules tampered. You profited. Miss Harcourt discovered discrepancies. She confronted you. You sought to placate her, perhaps by charm, perhaps by lies, but she resisted. Barstow tried to speak, but Wolfe raised a finger. Enough. Your alibi is broken, your presence near her apartment confirmed, and your trinket left in her room. You are guilty of fraud, not the knife. Sit. Barstow collapsed into silence, sweat running. Wolfe turned to Geraldine Lyle. She sat rigid, furs gathered about her like armour. You, madam, financed the enterprise. You gave Ames money, met him secretly. Why? Because your niece threatened to reveal her father's scandal, a matter that would stain your family name and diminish your inheritance. You feared disgrace, so you bought silence, not realizing the silence you purchased would be death. Geraldine's eyes blazed. How dare you? How dare you? Wolfe snapped back. You sought the passport as proof, demanded it of me, attempted to cloak your greed as loyalty. Your quarrel with her was heard. Your motives are transparent. Yet like Barstow, you did not wield the knife. Your sin is instigation. Geraldine gasped, but said no more. Next, Wolfe's gaze drifted to Ames, who sat immobile, hands folded. You, Mr. Ames, were the craftsman. You forged the passport, wrote the cipher. You accepted funds from Geraldine, direction from Vandrea, and cover from Barstow. You imagined your silence would shield you, but Saul Panzer observed your portfolio, saw you depart the print shop with it under your arm. That ties you to the act. You are the forger, and your forgeries made murder necessary. Ames's lips tightened, but he remained mute. Then Wolfe opened his eyes wide, fixing them on Vandrea. The colonel met his stare with military stiffness, but his fingers twitched against his knee. And now, Colonel, the ash betrayed you. The witness saw you. But more than that, your vanity betrays you still. You believed yourself invulnerable, a man above consequence. You required a document that could pass in Europe, allowing you to move unobserved. You required silence from the girl who mocked you. When she refused, you struck her down. Your hand, your blade, your pride. Vandrea surged up, fists clenched. I will not be slandered. Sit, Wolfe commanded. Your own mouth condemned you yesterday. Tonight, we finish it. Kramer's detectives moved closer, ready, but Wolfe gestured them back. He wasn't done. Let us trace it precisely, Wolfe said. His voice deepened, every word measured. Miss Harcourt discovered the counterfeit. She confided partly to her roommate, partly to her aunt. She came to me with the passport, hoping I would guard it. That night, she pawned a handbag containing stamps and a cipher letter, for she knew she could not keep them safe herself. The next evening, she was killed. He leaned forward, eyes still on Vandrea. Barstow lied of his whereabouts. Geraldine lied of her innocence. Ames lied by silence. Yet only one of you carried the weapon and the will. Only one of you left Turkish ash pressed into the passport's binding. Only you, Colonel. The room went taut as wire. Vandrea's jaw worked, his face purple. Geraldine turned away. Maria whimpered. Barstow wiped his brow. Ames stared at the floor. Wolfe pressed on. I shall add this. The knife itself was ordinary, a kitchen blade. Vandrea, for all his pride in arms, would never own such. He borrowed it, from Barstow's office, where Saul observed a set missing. That ties the two of you. One supplied, one struck. Barstow jerked upright. I never. You did, Wolfe cut him off. You provided, knowingly or not. And when the deed was done, you aided in the cover. Your lies betray you. Kramer barked. Enough wriggling. Vandrea, you're done. But Wolfe lifted a hand. One more. He turned at last to Maria. She shrank under his gaze. Madam, you sheltered lies. You misled me. But more, your silence after Evelyn's death was deliberate. You feared Barstow, perhaps loved him, and in your fear you betrayed your friend. That is your burden. Maria broke into sobs, covering her face. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes. Inspector, there is your murderer, Colonel Vandrea. The others conspired, abetted and financed, but his hand struck. The evidence is complete. Vandrea shouted, I demand! But Kramer was already barking, Take him! The detectives seized the colonel, cuffed him as he raged. Geraldine screamed protests, Barstow moaned, Maria wept. Ames remained silent. One by one they were marched out, their voices echoing down the hall. Kramer stayed behind, glaring at Wolfe through smoke. You've done it again, blast you, he growled. I'll have to sort the charges, but you've nailed the killer. Damn your methods, Wolfe, but you're right. He slammed his hat on and stomped out. The door shut. Silence filled the room. Wolfe reached for his beer, poured and drank deeply. Then he exhaled. Archie, the case is finished. I sat back, my notebook closed. Finished for you, maybe. For Kramer, it's just beginning. Phooey, Wolfe muttered. Let him toil. I have done the thinking. He drained his glass, set it down with a click and closed his eyes, already drifting back to the piece of orchids. Archie Goodwin again, and if you think the brownstone went quiet after Kramer and his parade of suspects departed, you'd be wrong. Quiet isn't the word for the air that follows when Wolfe has pulled a murderer from his chair like a rabbit out of a hat. The lamp still glowed on polished wood. The red leather chairs sat crooked from the struggle, and Fritz hovered in the doorway like a man unwilling to cross into the aftermath. Wolfe remained motionless. He hadn't moved since draining his glass. His eyes were closed, but the pulse in his temple throbbed like a drummer. I knew better than to speak. The room was still humming with the echoes of Vandrea's protests and Geraldine's shrieks. That sort of racket lingers in the plaster. It was Fritz who broke the silence, his voice soft. Shall I bring another bottle, sir? Wolfe opened one eye. Yes, and the duck reheated. Fritz vanished. Wolfe turned his gaze on me. Archie, clear the chairs. I will not endure their scent. I set about it, dragging the red seats back into place, smoothing cushions still warm from reluctant guests. I gathered Geraldine's fur glove she'd dropped in her fury and set it on the desk for Kramer's collection. The air was heavy with cigar smoke, perfume, and something acrid that belonged only to fear. Fritz returned with the tray, roast duck, crisped again, and a fresh chilled bottle with glass. Wolfe poured, drank, and let out a sigh deep enough to shake the table. "There," he said. "Now the world may resume its course." I sat across, milk in hand. "Not quite. Kramer will be back tomorrow with a dozen questions, and Barstow, Geraldine, Ames, they're not free of the mess." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "That is for the courts. My concern was the hand that struck. It is finished." I let him chew duck in silence for a while. Fritz cleared the tray without word, his eyes flicking at me as if to say, "Keep him calm." By 11, Wolfe leaned back, glass drained. He closed his eyes, voice soft. "Archie, I am weary, yet satisfied." The house settled into sleep, but my mind didn't. Evelyn Harcourt's pale face haunted the quiet halls. She'd trusted Wolfe to guard her secret, and in a way he had, but not soon enough to spare her. The next morning dawned bright, brisk, Manhattan shaking itself awake with horns and shouts. Wolfe stayed in bed late, breakfast untouched until Fritz cajoled him with buttered rolls. I read the papers at my desk. The headlines screamed of a colonel under arrest, scandal in shipping, whispers of treachery. The Gazette gave Wolfe's name one grudging line, noting a West 35th Street investigator had aided the police. When Wolfe finally descended, he waved the paper away. "Sensationalist nonsense. They will distort it until it resembles Carnival." "Still," I said, "your name's in print. Kramer must be chewing his cigar in half." Wolfe grunted, lowered into his chair and rang for beer. "Then let him chew. I am uninterested." By noon, Kramer himself appeared, pounding the door like a battering ram. I opened it, and he shoved past, face red, eyes bloodshot. "Damn you, Wolfe," he barked. "Vandrea's in custody, but the press has him a hero fallen from grace. You've made this a circus." Wolfe didn't look up from his book. "Nonsense. I merely exposed fact." Kramer slammed his hat on my desk and left me to pick up the pieces. Geraldine is shrieking to every reporter she can find. Barstow's lawyers are crawling the commissioner. Ames won't say a word, and Maria's collapsed in tears. I'll be months untangling it. Wolfe lifted his eyes. "That is your occupation, Inspector." Kramer growled. "One of these days I'll drag you down there and let you stew." "You won't," Wolfe said, voice mild, "because each time you attempt to unravel murder, you require me. Admit it." Kramer bit his cigar nearly in half, then spun toward the door. "To hell with you," he stamped out. I chuckled. "He'll be back before long, same as always." "Of course," Wolfe said, already returning to his book. That afternoon, Saul arrived, cap in hand. He reported that Barstow's office had been shuttered, clerks dismissed, and police crawling over shipping manifests. Wolfe listened, nodded once, and dismissed him with a rare compliment. "Your diligence, Saul, was indispensable." Saul's eyes twinkled. "You don't say." He tipped his cap and left, content. Maria Kent telephoned later, voice trembling. She begged to see Wolfe, to thank him. He declined. "Tell her," he instructed me, "that gratitude is unnecessary. She must live with her conscience, and that is punishment enough." I delivered the message as gently as I could. By evening, the brownstone had regained its rhythm. Fritz served veal with morels at 1 o'clock, trout at 8. Wolfe gave both their due, though less heartily than usual. He spent his hours reading histories, occasionally muttering at the margins. I knew better than to disturb him. When the clock struck 10, he rang for beer again. I joined him with milk. The office was warm, the lamps glowing, shadows soft on the walls. "Archie," Wolfe said at last. The girl was reckless, yet she showed courage. She entrusted me with her burden, and though I despise entanglements, I honoured it. Vanity killed her, Vandrea's vanity most of all. That is the lesson. I nodded. "And what about Geraldine, Barstow, Ames? They're not exactly choir boys." "They are gnats," Wolfe said. "Gnats swarm around vanity. Remove the great fool and the swarm disperses." I leaned back, glass in hand. Boston's loss, New York's brief comedy, I said. Wolfe opened one eye. A poor quip. Maybe, I said, but it's true enough. Evelyn's gone, but the farce around her will keep lawyers busy for years. Wolfe closed his eyes again, settling deeper into the chair. Enough. The case is concluded. Tomorrow, orchids. Fritz appeared silently, gathered the glasses, and disappeared again, leaving us in peace. Wolfe sighed, long and slow, as though dismissing the world entire. The office settled into the hum of the city beyond the windows. Another case concluded, another knot untangled, another glass of beer drained. Justice, Wolfe style, had been done within those walls, and the orchids would bloom undisturbed.